It was a bitterly cold night in 2018 when I moved into an old, weathered house deep in the countryside. The kind of house where the nearest neighbor was miles away and the nights were so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat. This place had a reputation in the nearby village. People whispered that it was haunted, but I dismissed it as just another old wives' tale meant to scare off city folk like me. The first few nights passed uneventfully. The house was drafty, the floors creaked with every step, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. That was until the fifth night, when everything changed. I was settled in the living room, reading by the dim light of a single lamp. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but I paid it no mind, absorbed in my book. Suddenly, a faint scratching noise broke the silence, coming from the ceiling above me. I paused, listening intently, but the sound ceased as abruptly as it had begun. I chalked it up to a rat or some other small creature, though unease began to creep in. But then, the scratching returned, louder this time, as if nails were being dragged across wood. I stood up, my heart beginning to race. The scratching moved, traveling from the ceiling to the walls, circling the room. It was as if something was trapped behind the wallpaper, desperately trying to break free. Panic set in, but I fought to stay calm. I grabbed a broom and banged it against the wall, shouting, "Get out! Get out of here!" The noise stopped, and the house fell into an oppressive silence. I took a deep breath, convinced it was over, but then the lights flickered, and the temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my breath in the air, forming a mist. The rancid odor that followed was unbearable, like rotting meat. The stench was overwhelming, making me gag. I covered my nose, but the smell seemed to seep into my skin, clinging to me. I stumbled back, my eyes watering, and that's when I saw it. In the darkest corner of the room, something was moving. At first, it was just a shape, a dark mass growing, stretching toward me. As it came closer, I saw it was a figure, tall and twisted, with long, gnarled limbs and eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. It moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance between us in seconds. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move as it reached out with one bony hand, its fingers ending in sharp, black claws. The creature's face was inches from mine now, its breath hot and putrid against my skin. It grinned, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and whispered in a voice that was both a hiss and a growl, "You shouldn't have come here." The room spun, and I felt myself being pulled into the darkness, into the creature's cold, unrelenting embrace. I fought to stay conscious, but it was like being drowned in ink, suffocating and cold. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears. When I woke up the next morning, I was on the floor, the room filled with sunlight. The creature was gone, but the smell lingered faintly. My body ached, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw deep, red scratches down my arms and neck, as though I had been clawed by something. I couldn't stay in that house another night. I packed my things and left, not caring where I went as long as it was far from that place. I never discovered what that creature was or why it targeted me, but I know one thing for certain: I'll never forget those glowing eyes or the pure, unrelenting terror that accompanied them. It was around 2013. I had been living in Seattle, but I moved back home to my parents' house for a short stay, a few months to get back on my feet before I could move to Tacoma. I came back in late summer and was gone to the city after Thanksgiving. During that time, I started to hang out with some folks from the old gang, people who stayed after high school. One of the people we hung out with, her grandparents owned a home overlooking a lake. It was awesome, we had some excellent parties there. Now Ashley, all names changed for privacy, and her family owned this home for a while since the mid-1980s, and she told us about an accident that happened. It was summer in the early 90s, and her father's friend died there. She was fuzzy on the details, but it was a jet ski accident and he drowned in the lake. Apparently they drug him to shore, but were too late. I'm not sure that explains what happened to us, but I just wanted to preface the story with that could have been a factor. It was late fall in 2013. My friend Chris and I were waiting on our respective girlfriends at the time, getting ready for a Halloween party that night. He was sitting playing some PC game in the corner, and I was watching some horror movie on TV. At this point it was dark, pretty pitch black, a dry night. I remember I went out back to smoke and I kept hearing a strange noise. The noise sounded like something slapping around in mud or muck. Not a strong thud, but weak just enough to grab my attention. I could hear it coming from around the lake. At this point, my buddy Chris is out here smoking with me. I asked him if he heard that noise. He said he did, so without really any real hesitation, we started to investigate. In some reeds we found a huge decaying salmon still alive. Its eyes were whited out, and whatever kind of rot it had, it was affecting its whole body. Rotting while it was alive. We were baffled. I don't know much about local flora and fauna, but from what Chris and I both knew, salmon didn't run in that lake, no sea access. That was weird. We chalked it up to the magic of Halloween. You know, weird shit happens. It wasn't Halloween, but good enough explanation. We just didn't really want to think about that sickening flopping sound. The ladies now finally ready, it was time to move out. We had a good time at my friend's house party, but after we headed back to the lake house. I failed to mention my friend Chris had moved in there recently. It was late. The girls had gone on to sleep, but Chris and I were hopelessly addicted to a MOBA called Heroes of Newerth at the time, so we wanted to get in a game. Who cares how many beers we had? During the game, we noticed the windows of the house were opened wide open. It was cold in the house. It's October in Washington State, talking 40 degrees outside. We had both our computers set up in the kitchen area, since no one used the tables for anything. Chris got up and shut each window. They were the kind of window that slide open from the bottom, so you needed to slide the window up to open it. After the game, we went out to smoke, a pretty common practice for us. As we were getting up, I heard Chris say, "What the hell, I closed these." The windows were back open, wide open like before. He closed them again. This time I saw with my own eyes. We smoked, went back inside to our computers, and as we entered the queue for another game, I noticed that once again the windows were opened wide again. At this point, we thought a friend of ours was trying to mess with us. A friend who knew we'd be there. It was a pretty common hangout spot for all our friend group. People dropped in all the time. So we looked out in the driveway and everything checked out, all the normal cars. Chris and I started to get spooked. Someone is messing with us and not one of our friends. We armed ourselves. Chris had a big mag flashlight made out of metal. I grabbed a big knife out of the kitchen drawer. We thought at this point it was time to go take a look around the house. The fog was starting to come in off the lake. If you've never seen fog creep and stretch, it's a weird thing. It's slow, but also almost in a heartbeat. It's covering the land in wisps, just enough to fool you. It dampens noise too, so every tree branch you snap under your feet sounds different, like it's just for you to hear. The flashlight was weak. It was old, so we just got a few feet of light. We looked around the house, starting out front where the driveway was. We looked by the cars, checking to see if our cars were fine, and we moved from there to the side of the house where the windows were. No one around. At this point, the lake couldn't be seen. It looked like it was made of smoke, just so thick with fog nothing could be seen. That's when we heard something, at first very softly. It was music. A song I have never heard, the slow roll of the piano. Both Chris and I were thrown off by the sound of the music. "You're hearing this music, right?" he asked. "Yeah, man," I said back. We were practically holding hands at this point, standing shoulder to shoulder, nearing closer to the back door. The music was starting to get louder, or just closer to us. Chris, with his flashlight, started looking in all directions, trying to find the source. It sounded like it was coming off the lake. If it was a boat or something, the fog would part. We would be able to see something moving. Nothing moved, but the music, some samba tune I could never make out. If I ever heard it again, I would recognize it. The music has never left me. Chris and I were both pretty unnerved by the situation unfolding. We went inside and locked the doors once again, the windows wide open. Chris closed them, and I remember this so vividly. Chris closed and locked the windows, and he looked white. He turned around and said I could hear the music off the lake. We went to bed snuggling in with our ladies, who were none the wiser. The next morning, I remember being woken up by Chris' girlfriend complaining how cold it was. The windows were left open overnight. Chris and I are still close friends. We discuss this every few years. We have never really landed on what the music was, or what was up with the fish, or even weirder, the windows that wouldn't stay closed. We don't know about if any of it was connected, or the untimely drowning that happened, if it had any connection. What I do know is that I never heard the music again, and neither did he.